Nobody likes the early kickoff until it turns into an impressive performance and result. 4 a.m. wake-up call for me on Saturday, but there is nothing like the feeling of slipping back between the warm and cozy sheets, having watched Aston Villa take advantage of a deeply wounded team. Presented by 24/7 Services, let's savor and review Villa 2, Manchester City 1. I had a pre-holiday coffee with a dear friend of mine, a guy named Nick Dazovich, who had a very distinguished career, Canadian international, played all around the world, including for St. Johnson in Scotland in the late 90s. And I was kind of shocked to hear him say how difficult it was being a player during the festive period, partially because of all the games that they stack up in there, but also on how much you miss out on. Like if you're a single guy, you're not going out with your mates. And then you think about all the families in Aston Villa, young kids like Martinez, Tielemans, Dean, Boubacar Kamara, Ollie Watkins. Like, they have young kids who are experiencing the magic of Christmas, and you're going to bed early, not imbibing, not feasting. You're probably training on Christmas Day, and this is one of the sacrifices that you have to make during your very short career window. I cannot imagine how glum the players might have been had they not picked up an impressive result with a good performance to match, knowing that an historically horrible fixture is on the horizon, Boxing Day. And I think it's the same for us fans. Like me, on Saturday night, we were hosting company. I was floating around the house, the host with the most, on cloud nine, serving way too many cocktails and treats. And there's just something different about the atmosphere of games at this time of year. A win like that at this time of year fills me up inside. This is where I welcome you officially to the Holy Trinity Show, and I named it that way because I always viewed the original Trinity Road stand as a holy building, almost church-like, with the brick facade, stained glass windows, the congregation singing songs inside. But Trinity also means three, and I like to narrow down the three key issues or moments that defined, in this case, Villa 2, Man City 1. Both of our senior correspondents were in the house on Saturday, savoring victory. Samir busting out a classic Umbro throwback track top from the year 1992-93, while Alex Dutton was gathering footage with his spanky new early Christmas present phone. His band Tatarka has new material coming out in early 2025. Statistically speaking, Villa were second best in almost all categories except the most important one. I like that our shot attempts versus on-target ratio was good on Saturday, even though we created 4 big chances and missed on 3 of them. We did have the better of ground duels, and duels won in specific, but when you look at these categories, you'd think Manchester City were comfortable victors, and this is where sometimes data does not support what the eyeballs see. A couple of interesting elements to our starting 11, including a start for Amadou Onana, but playing alongside Boubacar Kamara, which I think many of our fans were curious about seeing. And that solid underbelly allowed Jhon McGinn and Youri Tielemans to play farther forward. McGinn, his usual industrious self, but Tielemans thrived, kind of like he did in this fixture last year, where he was playing farther forward on the right-hand side. And Tielemans was collecting the ball often behind what has suddenly looked like a very old Manchester City midfield without Rodri, but he was also playing through them and around them. He really did have his way in the game. And when I saw that 11 initially, it didn't scream out attacking juggernaut to me, but somehow we did manage to look dangerous every time we went forward. Jhon Duran has forced Unai Emery's selection hand, and he's rewarded his manager because in every single start this season, Duran has scored at a rate of 1 every 83 minutes, I read somewhere. Notable by their absence were Diego Carlos and Jadon Philogene, both of whom have been the subject of transfer and loan speculation of late, and you do wonder if something's afoot because prior to the game Saturday, Unai Emery made no mention that those players would be unavailable through injury heading into this game. Big issue, the Matt Cash versus Jack Grealish matchup, and I know a lot of triggered fans would have gone to a dark place in seeing this fixture and looking at the form chart of each and thinking, oh, here's where Manchester City comes out of their funk and where Jackie Boy Grealish comes back to haunt his boyhood club. But that didn't really materialize. Yes, Grealish was heavily leaned on in that first half, and we didn't mind allowing him to receive those long raking switches because it gave us time to recover and shift over. And for the most part, Matt Cash did okay. He dodged an earlier yellow card situation and wasn't booked, and then he did take a yellow card late in the half, but really there were only a couple of occasions where it looked twitchy. I would have thought that Pep's team would have tried to exploit that fact more in the second half, but that never really materialized. And I'm sure the message to Cash heading in was, show Grealish wide. And every time Grealish drifted infield, there was Boubacar Kamara to help double up. And so our oft-maligned Polish Cafu would have gone to bed on Saturday night sleeping soundly, knowing that his team had collected all 3 points and that his side of the park had not been breached. And the only complaint I might have had is that he didn't square the ball up for a tap-in early in the second half rather than opting to shoot. But all in all, a difficult challenge that Cash survived. Incredible moment, the Ortega save on Pau Torres. I mean, we thought Martinez's was pretty good at Nottingham Forest last week. How about this one? And after surviving that grade A chance just moments earlier from the corner, Torres makes a run we've seen him make before where he goes across the goalkeeper to head it on. Great contact, great direction, and Ortega claws it out. Now, we may not have scored from either of those big chances, but that still would have planted the seed of doubt into a very fragile Manchester City team. 2 more very sexy bathroom renovations from 24/7 Services over the past few weeks, including the Great Bar Hotel. Painter Jay was scheming on how to completely update the women's toilets without disrupting the hotel's pre-festive party business. So from the plan to completion, 3 weeks, a week longer than they thought because there were surprises behind the wall. How often does that happen? But just look at how tidy and how elegant this is. The hotel is absolutely thrilled, and I would not be surprised if 24/7 Services was back there to do other work in the near future. And then in Lichfield, a new bathroom with bold colors and incredible wallpaper. 24/7 Services works with the client to select the colors in the paper, and the finished product is this striking modern look, which is perfect for a smaller bathroom. And then they added in some wood paneling and wainscoting, quality, tight craftsmanship, happy clients where the fair quote matches the final cost. I know Paul Handsaker and his entire crew would like to wish all Aston Villa fans, all past clients and future ones, a very happy and peaceful Christmas. Irritating issues on a personal level. I need hernia surgery in January, which is not optimal. And then on Friday, I'm eating dinner and one of my teeth breaks apart. So now it's poking my tongue with this jagged bit, which is why I'm talking the way I'm talking, just in time for Christmas. That's going to be expensive, I imagine. Another irritating issue was Aston Villa allowing the clean sheet to slip late. Oh, Luca Dean has been sublime for us. But unfortunately, he picked the worst time to step on the ball, and I know the 3 points is all that matters, but clean sheets need to become habit forming for us. Big issue number 3, no Manc mercy. Now, future punishments notwithstanding, I highly doubt we ever see another Manchester City team this vulnerable, this weakened. In fact, we may never see another title-winning team ever look this endangered after a title-winning campaign. I've said it a million times. Rodri's absence from this group is monstrous. Add in Ederson, Diaz, and others. The list does go on. But it also feels like Manchester City has suddenly become old overnight when you look at Kovacic, Gundogan, De Bruyne, Walker, and it's scary how fast it happens. Now, if you're the opponent and you smell blood, you don't think about all those things. You just think about feasting. A good friend of mine went moose hunting a couple of months ago. It's something we do here in Canada. There's an analogy coming here. The meat is good. It's like beef, leaner, not gamey, and one moose can feed a lot of people over the course of a year. When a moose becomes wounded in the wild, though, it attracts all the other animals, particularly wolves. And unlike hunters, who love the thrill of the stalk, wolves don't care. They just want to eat. And it's not like the moose's family go, well, we're going to hang out with you until you demise. You've had a good life. We're going to be by your side. No, they scatter and leave the poor thing to die in the wild, which is kind of like how it feels with Manchester City right now. It's not about the hunt. It's about feasting on a wounded animal. Perhaps the only complaint Unai Emery could have is that we didn't feast more, because every time Villa went forward, we looked dangerous. And then when we sat in our low block, we looked impenetrable. Really, the only notable save Emi Martinez had to make was off of Phil Foden, and he did very well there. But like a pack of wolves, collectively, we were cohesive, and then we got individual moments at the right time, and we got another battle-hardened performance from our skipper, who looked like he was thriving in that right-sided number 10 type role. And the only self-criticism John McGinn could have was that later in that first half, he had his prey in the crosshairs, and he just didn't pull the trigger at the right time. Big issue number 2, Duran's diligence. The question has never been, is this player good enough, or is this kid talented, because he's dominated at every level since he was about 15 years of age. No, the question has been, can this player play in a very demanding, very detail-oriented structure? And can Duran also grow up knowing how good he is and not allow his own youthful compulsions to get in the way of both his career and his club's ambitions? I said in the summer, based on everything I had read and heard, that he was gone. I did not see another way. Thankfully, I was wrong. Obviously, half the credit goes to Duran himself and maybe even the people who advise him, and the other half goes to Aston Villa for being demanding and expecting higher standards, and then just being patient, realizing that they do have talent on their hands and not doing what so many clubs might have done, which was sell him and his problems to West Ham in the summer, and we have benefited from that ever since. As Villa Park tour guide Diane Russell said, this is what happens when adults are in charge. You know how much I rate, respect, and admire Ollie Watkins, but even he admitted this week that it's been a very stop-start season for him, due partially to England duty, infringing on a proper preseason, and then some lingering, niggling injury issues. But the competition between those two players is the very best-case scenario for the club, for us fans, and for the players themselves. There was a moment, though, in that game on Saturday where the thought did cross my mind, are we starting to see the very beginning stages of a succession? Because do you remember when Jhon Duran hunted down goalkeeper Ortega in the second half, forcing a throw-in, for which the crowd roared its approval? And I wonder if Duran was thinking at the time, you mean I can get love from this crowd for doing something other than scoring? And maybe, just maybe, Duran's forward defending and pressing and work rate light bulb is starting to come on automatically now. If we could fuse two aspects of our forwards together, I would give Jhon Duran Ollie Watkins' ability to hold that run and stay onside, because if Duran had that, well, it might have been more comfortable earlier. But even in that second half goal that was ruled offside, you see how many tools he has and how many different types of goals he can score. So unpredictable in both the technique and then the location of the shot. What was it, 13 seconds into the game, and Jhon Duran is presented with a glorious big chance to open the scoring, and he should have scored. And I wondered if Watkins was in that situation, would he have buried it? Not sure, but I pretty much guarantee he would have at least taken it those 2, 3, or even 5 yards further, which is probably what Duran should have done in hindsight. Later in the game, Watkins is on, and he has a chance in the left channel. Not the greatest shooting angle, but he has a go rather than cutting it across. And I wondered then, is Watkins having a go here because he is starting to feel the pressure of not producing for the team, while Jhon Duran is? I say it again, the best case scenario, these two players are in competition with each other. The only better case scenario is that we somehow find a way of playing both of them on the park at the same time. And if somebody had to acquiesce the number 9 role, the traditional 9 role, it would probably be Watkins, just based on past experience. The first goal was so important in this game because it preys on the lack of confidence of a weakened opponent, and it also supercharges the atmosphere. And credit Emi Martinez for spotting Youri Tielemans, because Dibu starts this goal. Tielemans, fantastic to turn away, and then he uses a technique that a coaching mentor of mine calls punching it, where the ball accelerates quickly but then holds up. And Jhon Duran, it's so interesting to me, after a very unselfish ball across from Morgan Rogers, how Duran always seems to know what technique to use. In this case, it's just a little left-footed stab that elevates the ball high enough to get over an outstretched leg, but not so high that the goalkeeper can get a hand on it. And the number one big issue that defined Villa 2, Manchester City 1, Rogers' redemption. Does a player raise his game when facing a former employer, especially when that employer sold him just over a year ago for $1.2 million to a championship team? Pep Guardiola told Rogers that he expects big things out of him, just not in the immediate future and not for Manchester City. So it's no surprise to me that Morgs was on his best behavior on Saturday, trying to prove a former boss wrong for getting rid. You could make a strong case that Morgan Rogers was the man of the match because he had an assist, then he scored the game-winning goal, and he became the youngest player in Premier League history to accomplish that against a reigning champion, which is extraordinary to me, and I'm starting to doubt whether my really early morning brain on Saturday was processing that information correctly, but I'm running with it. And the game-winning goal, the 2-0 goal, was a soul-nourishing moment because in a couple of instances, we saw Morgan Rogers' vision and ability converge. It's funny what our eyes drift to when we're watching replays like this one. I tend to focus on the goalkeeper's feet because it shows the perfect release point for the shot, where the goalkeeper is not necessarily flat-footed, but slightly static. And this is the definition of clinical and ruthless, where the player processes a lot of information all at once. The goalkeeper's stance and where he's positioned, the space on either side, and then the defender just opening up his legs ever so slightly to be able to slip the ball through. We've seen Rogers score this goal a couple of times already. But there were other moments as well where we saw vintage Rogers, where he runs past and even through people, leaving them in his wake like a diesel locomotive, gaining momentum, including in the lead-up to his 2-0 goal. And it's amazing to me, including the Youri Tielemans role in the 1-0 goal, how often an Aston Villa goal starts this way, with a midfield player facing his own goal, turning past people, and then driving through. Unai Emery said, "Beyond our tactical execution, players sometimes have to have their own individual moments to bring to the game." Well, we saw that. This might have been the best example of Rogers at his best since the Arsenal game. It's not a huge issue, but I don't know if you noticed how unwell Morgan Rogers has sounded recently. Like going back to his first England appearance for the senior side, he was hacking up a lung during those interviews, and then he sounded terrible going into that week against Brentford and Southampton. Now, when I get sick and get a man flu, I'm out. I'm a baby. He had to go out and play against Southampton in awful conditions, and that must have been a miserable experience. But this is what players are expected to do. They must soldier on. On Saturday, I saw a player who looked lively, energetic, healthy, happy, confident, and long may that continue. The Sill Hill Brewery star performer is once again Youri Tielemans. I mean, we could have flipped the coin between him and Morgan Rogers, but his role in the 1-0 goal, invaluable, and he was just on it on Saturday. And do you know what Youri Tielemans and his cute little family of 3 daughters has for Christmas, food-wise? They do the Swiss-Austrian raclette. And that's where you cook some protein and food on top, and then you put cheese on it and heat it under this little broiler. I wonder what Youri will eat as protein for Christmas. But what you need with the cheesy goodness of raclette, which is what we're having on the 27th, you need good beer. And specifically, North Star hopped porter. Oh, I just want you to look at this. Look at this perfection prior to the game on Saturday. This is carefully and lovingly crafted by brewmaster Mark Gregory, and for a crazy low price compared to what you're paying around elsewhere. And no dinner table, I think, is complete without a nice assortment of beers. Maybe you should go to the brewery tomorrow and pick up a couple to scatter around your dinner table. And I know the entire Sill Hill crew wants to wish you and yours a very barley Christmas and hoppy New Year. Do you like that? Trademarked. Holy Trinity Show. Upward trajectory on the Villa Park points haul. We scored first for the 4th game in a row. One of those goals from Jhon Duran to add to the strikers' tally. That's more like it. Couldn't keep the darn clean sheet, though, and incredibly, we conceded again in the final 15 minutes. And we were also oddly caught offside 3 times, which nullified a Duran goal. But obviously, the only stat that matters is 3 points, which put us in 5th on Saturday before Bournemouth knocked us down to 6th with a big win at Old Trafford, while Forest won at the most difficult venue in the league on Saturday, Brentford. The Bees' first home loss this season. The Premier League is a horrible minefield. Part of the reason why Saturday was such an important win for our club was the impending fixture on Boxing Day at St. James's Park, and we have had a horrible time playing against the Toon. In fact, our last win against the Magpies on their patch was 2005 when Gareth Barry scored 2 goals. And our last 2 visits were thumping horror show 4-goal defeats. Newcastle is coming off a 4-0 win at Ipswich on the weekend. The time between Saturday and Boxing Day is reasonable, so I don't expect there to be a whole lot of changes from Saturday. Maybe Ming's in, and it's a big game because if the Toon defeat us, they'll leapfrog us in the table. I found it interesting this week, too, that Unai Emery actually said that Newcastle United should be expected to finish ahead of Aston Villa, which is him maybe playing the game a little bit. But I feel like this game on Boxing Day is going to come down to who controls the midfield. And that's why I'd like to stick with the structure that we had on Saturday. And I would also, based on history, take a point right now. This has been the last Holy Trinity show before Christmas, which is easily my favorite time of year because growing up, my parents spoiled us with their beautiful holiday traditions from Germany, which we are now handing on down to our kids. But I also realize this can be a very difficult time of year for many people because it reminds us of all the things that we don't have in our lives, particularly lost loved ones. And that's why having Aston Villa in our lives is so important because we know we are always part of that extended family. And I am so humbled and grateful to be a distant relative in that family, kind of like the annoying uncle who drinks just a little bit too much at Christmas time. Until Boxing Day, Merry Christmas or Happy Christmas from my family to yours. And as always, up the mighty Villa.